Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunwerks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunwerks. Today, we're going to get into some Radikl Smart Scope stories. We've been talking about these around the office now that it's spring and getting excited for some more hunts with this. We all have experience with this. Joined with me is Derec Davidson, Aaron Davidson's son, prolific hunter. He has shot over 200 animals with the Radikl Smart Scope just last year. We're going to get into how one does that very quickly. And then we're also really excited and happy we have both Revic product managers. We've got Jordan, the product manager for scopes, both spotting scopes and rifle scopes, and Nathan, product manager for range finding gear. So welcome, gentlemen.
Yeah, thanks.
It's going to be exciting.
Thank you. Good to be here this morning.
So let's kick it off first with, because we're talking about smart scopes. That's the whole topic today. Jordan, what is a smart scope? What is the Radikl Smart Scope? So we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, and I think the Radikl really defines the category, to be honest with you. And, you know, we've showcased this quite a bit. And one of the things I like to start with when I convey this to people is imagine a scope where the top 15% of your field of view is a heads-up display, a digital heads-up display when you look through the scope. And with the Revic Ops app, you're able to upload a ballistic profile to the scope. With that, we have a bunch of onboard sensors on the scope so that as you dial your elevation turret, you know precisely where you're going to impact. I mean, it's pretty revolutionary optic. Instead of just having a ballistic calculator that tells you your MOA or mil solution, the scope is defining that for you. So someone can just provide you a quick line of sight range from any rangefinder. All of a sudden, you've got the ability to take a shot instantly. So it's pretty revolutionary optic. I mean, that's the Revic logo, but the Radikl comes in 3 different flavors. We've got the 21B, which is a 3.5 to 21. We've got a 4 to 25 and a 6 to 36. So we got some different offerings for you there. You know, you can choose something that's maybe a little easier handling, a little bit lighter weight. That's kind of the 21. And then a lot of our customers find themselves in the 4 to 25, the RS25B. And then 6 to 36 is kind of a standalone, has a different reticle. But we like all of them. All of them have their place in your hunting situation. But yeah, I don't know if anyone has anything else to add to that.
Well, I think that heads-up display, being able to stay in the scope, we're going to talk about, it's kind of the undercurrent of all of our stories, right? Bad things happen when you get out of your scope and during a hunt. But this line of sight, unpack a little bit, using any rangefinder, which is common. Derek's going to talk about all of his globe-trotting adventures where you don't necessarily know what this guide is using. How does that work? You get a line of sight measurement, and how are you getting a ballistic solution out of that for the system you're running?
For sure. So when you look through the scope, that top 15% that I mentioned is a digital display. And what you're going to see is kind of a clock face, which is your wind values. There's kind of 2 wind modes that we have in the scope, either base wind or vector wind, and we'll get into that. And then what you're also going to see is when you haven't made an elevation adjustment, you'll see 100 yards. We recommend 100 yard zero on the scope. And as you begin to basically dial that elevation turret, you'll see that number change in your field of view. So as you dial up, what was 100 is growing incrementally. So 110, 111, 112. As you begin to turn that turret, all of a sudden you can get a line of sight from your buddy. Let's say he says 300 yards to that antelope. You just dial until you see 300 yards in your heads up display, and then you can take your shot. So it's a kind of a dynamic digital range.
And what's also cool about it is that it's accounting for angle as well. So your elevation, as you change in elevation or, shooting up at 15 degrees, you can take that scope and move it up or down, and you'll see that number change. And that's the line of sight distance at which that bullet's going to hit.
Sure.
It's pretty cool.
Mike Pilch has a great story, prolific sheep hunter, and he told it on the podcast where it was around a sheep that was at a massive angle. He was sliding off the cliff, and he knew the line of sight was 600, but the equipment was saying dial to 300, literally cut it in half. And he had this argument with himself where it's like, okay, do I trust the equipment or do I try and, do some back of napkin math and figure it out myself? He's like, no, I'll just trust the equipment. Pulled off a perfect shot, right? And so this line of sight, translating a line of sight measurement using the onboard atmospherics and the angles but the ballistics are where the magic's happening, right? So where do you keep the ballistics? The ballistics are on the phone.
So like you create a ballistic profile. A lot of people have, used ballistic solvers before and they're familiar with that. What's foreign to people is that this is actually on board with your scope. So there's an initial setup process where you link your scope to the Revic Ops app and upload a profile. But after that, it's a standalone unit. It's a standalone ballistic solver. So like Nathan was talking about, it's accounting for your environmental conditions, your shot angle, your temperature, all sorts of things, the azimuth that you're pointing the rifle at, your compass heading is how some people think of it, but it's all accounted for within the scope. If you put a wind vector in, which is a wind speed and a wind direction, all of a sudden you now account for your earth-based effects. You count for aero jump and spin drift. Like all that is within your field of view. It's accounted for. All you're doing is adjusting the elevation turret. So it's a ballistic engine on top of your rifle is the best way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And it makes it to where you don't have to think about anything. It just does it for you.
Yeah, we
They're
think in yards. Yeah. Like when you get into one of those situations where it's like, that's the biggest animal you've ever seen, like you're not going to be able to intuitively think about MOA or mil. And, your buddy gives you a line of sight like 450. I mean, you can see it right there. You're not going to make that mistake in the heat of the moment. It makes it a lot more intuitive.
I've seen people, haven't never shot long range before, and you just get down there and you tell them a number and they just intuitively do it and then make the shot and they're like, wow, it's amazing the technology that's in that thing.
I love the incremental adjustment, right? So you're constantly building up a new ballistic profile. And so a common scenario we have, especially with Western game that are grazing, is they're not standing still long enough to take a good shot. They keep moving and they keep grazing. And so what you typically do is build one ballistic solution, and then as the animal's grazing, just keep following it until it gets into a shooting opportunity. But that could be 50 to 100 yards. And so now you've got an imperfect solution that you're stacking on top of maybe a jerky trigger pull or an imperfect bipod load. Whereas with that Radikl, you just keep dialing. You just see your yardage increase, and it allows you to build a perfect ballistic solution and save those errors for something else. One more thing before we move on from this. So you mentioned line of sight measurement. You mentioned that a few times. So it does not have the rangefinder built into it. Why is that?
Yeah, a lot of people, when they first kind of see the technology before them, one of the questions they ask themselves is, oh, does this have a rangefinder in it? And, the answer is no, it doesn't. And one of the big reasons we made that decision is everyone has a rangefinder in their kit. You don't even need a ballistic rangefinder. It's just a line of sight. Everyone's got it. I mean, you could get a distance from your dad who's 80 years old and doesn't really understand technology that well. In addition to that, it's like when you do integrate, laser rangefinder on board on a scope, it's like you're going to be compromising the optics at some point, like transmission, weight. I mean, it just starts stacking up. So, with line of sight, we feed the ballistic solver and you've got a perfect solution. You don't really need a rangefinder on board.
Perfect. Another reason why we probably don't have it on there is because there's a good chance some states are going to limit that for hunting. Yeah. They already limit the scope in a few states, which I'm sure we're going to talk about that later. But if you throw a rangefinder on there, all of a sudden it comes this tactical advantage, and they're like, man, we don't want you killing that many deer. Let's X that scope on it.
Also hits your wallet too.
Yeah.
Adding more components to it.
Yeah, there's definitely some legislative headwinds, like you said. So that was another thing strategically. It makes a little more sense to keep the system separate. It helps us.
Well, and while we're talking about that, I mean, the Smartscope, it's a lot of fun just outside of big game hunting, right? I mean, so this is a fun toy. We don't have to think about, if your state's not allowing, this product for a big game hunt. We've had a lot of fun shooting small game, coyotes.
Oh yeah, this is being used in NRL and all sorts of shooting competitions, like any dynamic situation where you got to transition from target to target and you got to compensate for your environmentals right then and there, like this is quick. Like it's very quick to move from target to target.
Yeah, maybe it's a great point to bring up. Jordan has a great video on the Revic YouTube channel where they actually compare all of their products. And so there's a massive time saving from building the ballistic profile in your app on your phone to using the ballistic range finding bino, so then using the Radikl Smart Scope. I mean, the seconds just continue to decrease, till you get to that Radikl Smart Scope. And it's impressive to see because we've all been in hunting scenarios where we know 5 seconds is an eternity if you can't pull that shot off quickly.
Yeah. I mean, you can watch that video and kind of see how it played out. But I think personally, one of the big advantages of the Radikl is like you're never leaving that field of view of the scope. And I mean, we can all put ourselves in a situation where we've been tracking an animal and we've lost it, right? Because of you got distracted or you were doing something else, maybe inputting a solution, looking up at your turret. Like with the Radikl, you never have to leave the eye box. And we're going to get into some of the reasons or situations where that's been a huge advantage, but you're 100% right.
Yeah. If you want to compare that to anything, I like to compare it to, a fancy new car with a heads-up display, basically. So the reason why they have a heads-up display is so you don't have to leave your windshield and look down at your gauges and look up and all of a sudden there's a car there. You're always looking at what you're supposed to be looking at with the information you need down in the bottom.
Yeah. Great analogy. Derek, let's keep going. Let's tell some stories here. So how does somebody kill 200 animals in a single year?
I do have to correct you. That's over 2 years.
Okay, 2 years. 100 a year.
That's 2024 and 2025.
Okay.
One, I would say any of our Gunwerks reserve trips. So I've been hosting the last couple reserve trips we've been on, and I'll continue to host the rest of them probably alongside my dad. And it is 200 animals, and I would say about 75% of those are cull trips, so cull animals. But they're all big game, and it's just like shooting something with big horns. I mean, a cull trip is the same as shooting big game animals, so same practice, right? And the rest of them being trophies, and we go over a couple trophy examples, but 200 animals is a lot. But if you
most people hope to get that in their lifetime. Yeah. But if under 2 years,
if you think I took almost 10 people with me on each one of those trips, so over the last 2 years, I may have killed 200, but as a crew, as a reserve group, we've probably killed 1,500, 2,000 animals.
Sure.
In the last 2 years on those trips.
Well, yeah, you and your dad did a great podcast. We'll put the link in the show notes on the reserve and some of the hosted hunts that Gunwerks provides, and went in depth into that. But it's a great opportunity to be able to use the equipment to be able to bring home some pretty cool trophies, even on the cull hunts.
Yep. And actually, probably by the time this podcast launches, we're gonna have the new website up probably. So if you go to the reserve side, the experience side of the website, you can go see every trip we have planned for this year and next year. I don't think I'm going to post 2026 just yet, but there's a couple cool hunts in there.
That's exciting. So lots of opportunity to get to that 200 number for other people and to use the Smart Scope themselves. So how long have you been running the Smart Scope, and why did you switch over?
Yeah, that was my question. Did you shoot all 200 of those with the Radikl? Pretty close.
There was one elk that I had to shoot. Not had to, but the Radikl was not an option on that. So I did shoot it with an Acura scope. Other than that, I think the rest of them are all killed with the Radikl. Let's tag on. I've hunted every single one of those trips with someone else as my shooting partner. So that's 200 for me, and at least 100 for the rest of the guys.
Gosh.
So, and that's with the same rifle with the Radikl. So even though I'm sitting here, probably because I work for Gunwerks and my brother is doing concrete and my dad is up in his office, they would have the same examples that I have as well.
Yep. That talks through that a little bit, like maybe a memorable situation where the Radikl was kind of who's a big advantage for you, or any specific memory that sticks out on those?
I would say the one that sticks out the most is on last year's New Zealand hunt. We're out in the backcountry, and my brother Danner had already shot his tar, and it was my turn. And we had a tar pop out, and I'm going to blurt out some numbers here, but they're probably plus or minus 100 yards. After you shoot that many animals, they kind of just like, it was like within 500 to 1,000 yards. I think it was 640 yards, and it was an uphill shot. And where the Radikl came in clutch was, the first shot was 640, and I think I shot a little bit forward. I didn't hit it in a very good spot. I mean, it was pretty close, 640 yards. I'm 2 inches off. I'm not sure if that was wind or what it was, but I shot, and it's so steep there in New Zealand. It took what I thought was 3 steps down the mountain, and I asked for another range while I'm looking through the scope, and our guide yells out like 550. So that's a 100-yard difference when I thought it only took 3 steps, and I'm like, what? But while I'm looking through the scope, I can dial 550 and made a perfect shot. That was when the Radikl came in really quick. It's cool. If anyone has hunted New Zealand, they will know if you don't make that shot count, that thing will disappear like that.
Impressive.
Wow.
So you've been running a Smartscope for
Oh yeah, we didn't even
years?
answer that. So since conception, I mean, you think I probably had a prototype PMR at least a half a year before we launched it. And I have no idea that.
benefits to working here.
Yes.
Yeah, we shoot a lot of prototypes. We're always in
We're always testing. I ran that PMR for 6 years probably. And someone's going to have to look up when it came out. It was a long, long time ago. So we ran that PMR, and I ran it strictly. Like, I didn't run any other scope. As soon as we brought on our own scope, that's what I was running. And I didn't hunt a whole lot back then, but we definitely killed a lot of animals. And then there was a little stint there where I think it was around COVID where we quit making the PMRs, but we didn't have the Radikl out. So that's when I was shooting that Accurate rifle scope. And I do have a couple of Accurate rifle scopes on, like a Gunwerks WRX that I have, and a couple other ones, but I just end up shooting my.
Yeah, so fair to say, I mean, thousands of kills between you and your buddies and family over the course of this, which is just crazy. So when we talk about, smart technology, it's great when it works, but with these thousands of kills, if you had a battery go down or something that where you needed the backup ballistics.
In the PMR, we didn't have that BDR ring on it. So the backup was MOA. And you'd have to run a Revic Smart Rangefinder to get your ballistic solution then. I don't think out of the last, I'm just going to throw a number out, it's probably been at least 10 plus years that we've been shooting Smartscopes. I don't think I've ever had one to fail on me once, which, I'm knocking on wood now. If it did fail, I'm definitely equipped to make it happen. I've got a BR4 with me at all times, and I've got our range finding binos, and now we've got a BDR ring on the Radikl. So if the Radikl does die, it's a standalone optic. Like it doesn't need the smarts in it to function. So you pair the optic that maybe the battery's dead in it with your BR4 or your BLR10Bs. Yeah. Not the other one. It functions perfect.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You can approach it from a few different ways. That's what's pretty neat about it. Yeah. I had a similar story. We were down in West Texas, Jordan and I hunting some aoudad, and we spotted 3 pigs down at I think they were 650 when we first got on them. And I shot, we had a bad wind call, missed just to the left, and those things started running up the opposite side of the mountain. So we had a perfectly clean shot at them, and they were moving the whole time. And Jordan's just sitting there reading me distances, 640, 660, 680, Then it finally stops. I shoot, and I drop that one. Buddy that was with us that had never seen or used the scope before gets behind it, and the same thing, you know, they're probably at like 750 now, and we're reading distances all the way to 810, and then he shoots and drops one. And then Jordan gets up, and those pigs are still going up the mountain, and I think get all the way to like 910 yards, 920, and then he shoots and drops one. And it was like,
story.
well, and they're just like, they would, you know, end up behind a tree, and then you wouldn't know if you were having to come out and dial your MOA, we wouldn't have maybe but got one of those pigs. So it was just pretty neat that the shooter could just stay on them the whole time, and then as soon as that pig stopped, and it might have just been for a split second, we were ready to shoot. So I mean, I don't know that we could have done that without a Radikl.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, we had 2 rifles, but like a shooter transition while, you know, the pigs are running up the hill, and he's still able to get on it and drop one. It's like, how many times have you seen that where, you know, there was a full shooter transition and two hogs died from one gun? It was like,
And one of the guys had never looked through it, because I think that's one of the challenges people have with getting into some of this technology mentally, is to say, okay, it's going to be too complex, right? Like I have difficulty with my phone, so I don't want to, you know, complicate my scope. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like your guy in the group just jumped right on it. And
Yeah, no, it was pretty cool.
yeah,
And they would disappear, you know, but the shooter was always on them, you know, and he was sometimes telling the spotter where to look, you know, which is kind of opposite from the way hunts usually go.
I know. It was a cool moment too, because our buddy Pedro, I think he was accustomed to like traditional rifle scopes, but after that experience, you could just see it in his eyes. Like, he's like, I totally get it. He's like, yep, getting a Radikl.
well, and that ability of the shooter being able to take a little bit more control. You mentioned he was kind of telling the spotter, he was helping out. I think that's one thing that's really cool about the Radikl is you can transfer a little bit more of that load to the shooter if you want. So now you can have somebody more junior as your spotter, right? Because you're always in the eye box. You can easily build your ballistic solution in the eye box. You can add your vector wind and your wind speed while you're still staying in the eye box. Now you can take your kid out to be a spotter, because now all you need is a line of sight measurement. They just need to be able to get on the animal and get a good laze. You can take your wife out, and so you don't need that spotter to take as much of the load.
That actually brings up a really good point for the guys that are traveling international and kind of acting as they're a solo hunter, basically. You know, you travel to Tajikistan, it costs a lot to bring a buddy over and spot for you. So a lot of our guys, they're traveling alone, and the last thing you want to be doing is relying on Joe Schmo that's over there with his Vortex binos or whatever it is, spotting you and trying to give you a wind hold and whatever else you need. With the Radikl, you can be your own standalone guy. You can plug in your wind direction and speed. You can do your ranges if you're smart and over there. I said Vortex binos, but if you're hunting with a good outfitter, they probably have a set of Revic binos or a set of swirl binos. That's probably what it comes down to. So, and you can switch those swirl binos to give you a LOS range and an angle. I think it gives you both at the same time. So if you just talk to your outfitter and say, hey, I need this number, the LOS number. Don't give me the angle number. Give me the LOS number. Now all you have to rely on your guy to do is shoot me a range. And if they have meters, you can switch your scope over to meters if you need. But just tell me what to dial my scope to. I'll handle the wind. I'll handle the bubble level. I'll handle looking at mirage through my scope, like all of it.
You brought up 2 good points there. Is like, one is that the Radikl has a built-in digital level in the heads-up display. I don't think we really hit on.
It's one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. It's awesome. The other part I'm glad you brought up is like, you know, the default mode is base wind, right? So if you have a quick shot opportunity, you're going to be able to quickly look in the scope and see what's my wind hold for a 5-mile-an-hour wind. You can set it beforehand, maybe 5, 10, or 15. Then you can do some mental math quickly.
Yeah.
If you don't have the time.
That's how we used to do the old G7. That predates all of you guys, but yeah, the old black brick. We didn't have any wind direction. It didn't calculate for Coriolis or aerodynamic jump. It was just a base wind feature that you could range and toggle over to the other menu and see 5, 10, 15, 20. But if you got that 5, you could do, we kind of, in our shooting schools, we would teach everyone how to do a full value wind or a quarter value if it's coming. And you just learn to do that quick math. And I think that translated over for me. So I use the base wind feature if I'm in a quick situation, but it only takes 2 seconds to plug in a wind vector and a wind speed. So usually 95%, 99% of the time, I'm just throwing, while I'm waiting for something, I can just jump up, click it 3 times, get my arrow over to the direction that I can feel while I'm on the gun, the wind's coming across, and then I can judge if it's 0 to 5 or 5 to 10, and I can just plug in a quick wind. What that does for me is it makes sure that I have the correct yardage dialed, because it's going to be calculating for aerodynamic jump.
And spin drift.
And the spin drift, yeah.
Yeah, which, at 1,000 yards could, be 1, 2 MOA, which is the difference at that when you get out there.
It really is. And for those that haven't seen the scope, like, how do you input this wind that we're talking about? Well, like on the eyepiece, there's a little 5-position joystick. So it's as simple as looking through the scope and then just reaching up and just moving left and right. Then you can control your wind direction and wind speed. So it's literally just making a few little clicks and you can see it in your heads-up display, while you're staying on the animal.
Yeah, I love that. The simplicity. You're not jumping into a menu. You're not trying to get on your phone or get onto another device. You're just staying in the scope, and that little joystick, as soon as you start touching it, it's either changing your wind speed or your wind vector. And for folks that don't know what a vector is, Jordan, like, what are we talking about when we say wind vector? We know wind speed.
It's kind of just like the term for vector. Really, it's just a speed and a direction. So, when you put in a wind vector, all of a sudden the scope, using its magnetometer, accelerometer, it knows which direction you're pointing the rifle. And so then it can compensate at this point for those earth-based effects. So you don't get that when you're in base wind mode, but you really don't need it in most of those quick situations. But when you have some time to take a calculated and precision shot, it's that point where you can say, okay, which direction is the wind coming
in relation to the target.
In relation to the target, you can just think of it as a clock. Which direction is the wind coming from? If I'm facing at 12.
Yeah, and if you're in an open area, as Derek mentioned, a lot of times you can feel this on your face. You don't have to come out of the scope. But you mentioned if you have the time, we're literally talking about seconds. I've never timed myself, but it's got to be under 5 seconds. It's pretty quick.
It is quick.
Yeah, you mentioned the line of sight with our customers. Gunwerks has half the rifles in Asian sheep camps, and these are expensive trigger pulls. This might be an $80,000 Marco Polo, and the only thing in English you might be getting from your guide is that line of sight number. And so you don't want to chance, is he angle compensating? Is he giving me a ballistic solution? You just have to match the numbers in the scope that you're seeing with the numbers you're hearing from your guide. And that guide's probably going to be excited. 550, shoot. Your heart's beating. That's exciting. So we've talked about kind of, having the time, adjusting the wind speed and wind vector. We've talked about some of these, the importance of long range, getting that bubble level internally is critical. At long range, it becomes very, very important to have everything set up properly. And I love that you don't have to get out of the scope for that. We have an external one in case, again, there's full analog backup. It functions as a premium scope, which is one thing that I love. I haven't had the issue yet, but just knowing that, there's not going to be a problem if the scope goes down. The reticles are still there. You still have your MOA on the top turret. You've got a BDR. You've got an external bubble level. It's a premium scope. And so functions very well. We've talked about kind of having the time in the long range. What about close quarters? We had any experience kind of shooting in those closer distances where things are moving fast?
I had a lot of experience with that. I would extract after 1,000. Lots of it on the coal hunt where we're jumping some stuff really close and just trying to whack and stack there. Usually some running shots, which are my favorite, but one that we have on video that's going to come out here sooner or later, whenever we launch it is a Oklahoma hunt with one of our outfitters, Venator. It was an epic hunt. We are walking around Oklahoma drenched because it was just raining the whole day, and this bull elk pops out. I actually don't know how far it was, like 100 maybe yards, and it's pretty dark. It's overcast, so it's not ideal situations. It's thick trees, and usually I have my scope turned about 8 power. I try not to go any farther than that, just because when you jump into it, you're like, oh shit, I don't have enough power. So 8 power is where I find is the money spot. That elk popped out at like 100 yards, and I didn't even have to think like, oh, where's my reticle at? It was just like intuitive, although I do look through the reticle a lot. So it was just jump up, and I don't even know how to explain it. It was just there, right? It just happened. So made three great shots running, and that was one of the close quarter things that I've been in.
And this reticle design is the one with that German post right up the middle, right? Is that the reticle you were shooting?
The RH2 reticle, yeah. So the reticle that's in our Acura and our Radikl scopes. Yeah.
I had the opportunity to let my dad use it for the first time, and traditionally he hasn't used first focal plane scopes because the reticles are too fine for his eyes. He's in his 60s. And when I gave him the Radikl, it was like the light bulb went off in his head. You could see, he's like, man, I can actually see through this scope. I feel like I can make an offhand shot with this reticle. Because you're right, there's those super bold, just prominent stadia that bring your eye and center it in the center of the scope. So, making an offhand shot on a deer or something that you jump is definitely possible with this scope. And I would say it's one of the few first focal plane reticles that really allows you to do that. We got the reticle design just about perfect on the RH2.
So it's probably important to note, you talked about first and second focal plane. As a company, we don't do any second focal plane, other than maybe a few Gunwerks projects here and there where we need to do a specific scope. But we only work with first focal plane. Do any of you guys know why we do that?
Well, why don't you tell us, Derek?
So basically, if you have a second focal plane scope and you're out hunting, and for some reason you have that thing backed off just a little bit, if anyone listening to this, back in the day we were running a black scope. I'm not gonna say any names, but it was a second focal plane, and in our shooting schools we would teach 22 power or 11. Those are your two options when you're holding wind. And at 11 power you have to do some math because it's doubling your increment. So 1 dash isn't 1 MOA anymore, it's 2. And if you're at like 14 power, how do you do that math, right? It's so hard. And the reason why people like second focal plane scopes is the reticle is nice, right?
That's visible.
It's visible at any power because it enlarges, right? It's been a while since I've looked through a second focal plane scope. Or how does that look?
Yeah, they're typically like, on any second focal plane, it'll be large, even at base magnification, and then just stays at that magnification. But you're 100% right. It's like, those hash marks that we all grew up with, right, shooting. It's like if you're not at full magnification,
That thing,
you are not
anything.
If you're not hitting where you think you are.
Yeah.
And I've seen it happen on some hunts where, in the heat of the moment, from whatever reason, you're only on 12 power instead of 16, and you just airball like right over the bull. I've seen it happen. And everything feels right using second focal plane scope. So it's easy to make a mistake in those situations.
Yes. So I think it was right around the same time we came out with the PMR. As a company, we said, all right, no more second focal plane. We want our customers to succeed. So the least amount of errors that we can present them with, the better. So we only run first focal plane. Now there is the downside to the first focal plane, which is the reticle design. Any other first focal plane scope, the reticle just sucks bad. We could throw like 20 examples out there. Like, all right, you got to run this thing on max power for the reticle to even work, right? So I think we spent, should have had been a half a year designing this RH2 reticle. And it came out absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I'm in love with it. I
Do
love
we-
RH too.
You guys, I mean, don't spill the beans, but we're building scopes. We're always building new scopes. Are we even going to change that reticle in the new scopes?
You know, there's talk of, you know, we're always innovating in Revic, but, you know, there were so many elements that are done right in that. And so if we do change it, it's going to be like just
Very minute, yeah.
user, you know, input.
So that's one thing I love about Revic, both with the scope design and with the Radikl, is just the simplicity, right? It's meant for anybody can on the range pull off a good shot because you've got plenty of ammo, you've got plenty of time, you relax. It's in those hunting scenarios, right? Designing for hunting. And that's one of my first experiences with the Radikl. The very first time I looked through the Radikl Smart Scope, I was on a hunt, and you're anxious, your heart's pounding. I had to switch positions multiple different times and high angle shooting out to 450 yards, and be able to pull off that shot the first time, to look through that Radikl and say, wow, this is incredible technology, just really dumbed down to be able to work in a hunting scenario where you're just really anxious. So
I know, so true. In that situation, you're probably seeing multiple animals too. Like, that's another thing is, I'm sure you can share your experience. Like, you know, if you're switching from, oh, there's a bigger bull that just walked out, like, it's easy to move from target to target and, you know, correct your ballistic calculation.
absolutely. How many times have we all looked through the scope for a long time, following that one bull or one animal you want? And if you've got to come up to then look at your anything, all of your atmospherics, all of your adjustments, if you're doing that outside of the scope and then you come back in, you might be looking at a different animal.
Yeah, so true.
Heard stories about that.
Yeah,
Or second shots, being able to follow up and make sure you actually hit the animal, but that can be very costly.
I would actually say the second, like the follow-up shot is where this comes in super clutch. Because what happens after you make the first shot? Shit goes freaking crazy, right? So you got to be able to follow this animal while hopefully your spotter is just yelling out 650, 655, 670, right? You got to be able to follow this animal and make sure. I mean, a lot of the time, hopefully there's a bigger thing that's sticking out. But if you're hunting like Marco Polo that we're hunting in Tajikistan this December on one of our reserve hunts, we're going to be looking at 300 freaking sheep. And out of 5, actually it's 3 customers plus me and my dad. I guess that is 5. So out of 5 of us, one of us is going to make a bad shot, right? The odds are just there. So to be able to shoot, see your animal, and be able to correct while you're waiting for it to stop and give you that second look.
That might be 2 seconds.
Yeah, you don't want to be pulling a trigger on a second.
How costly is that mistake?
It's like 50 grand or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So the scope is paid for
Oh yeah.
in that. There's an insurance policy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
that's so true. Like when we were down in West Texas, and I'd never hunted aoudad before, and they all look very similar to me in size. There's a little bit of a learning curve on judging those things. And yeah, it was tough for me to pick out which ram I was after. Like, and then they would move in through the herd and another one would pop up with a shot opportunity. And I'm asking myself, was that the big one? Like, so, being able to just stay in the scope definitely was an advantage for us on that hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else? What else do we like about the Radikl?
Yeah. Like I mentioned before, I kind of glossed over it, but we do have different magnifications that I think we can kind of tailor to your hunting style. That 3.5 to 21 has been pretty popular with folks. And the 4 to 25, the 25B, that's probably our biggest mover at the moment. We sell a lot of those. It's, it's very capable. And we didn't talk about it, but the 6 to 36, that has an RX2, so a different reticle than what we spoke
More
about.
geared towards target shooting.
Yes.
It's a great scope to throw on the hammer, I would say. Hammer or verdict, probably.
Yeah.
And that's a Christmas tree reticle.
Yep, exactly. So that's focused a little bit more with, like extreme holdovers, extreme distance shots where you maybe maxed out your elevation travel and you're still needing to hold over for a shot. So there's scenarios where that can make sense, but I would say the majority of folks are going to find themselves in a 21B or 25B.
Let's go over the differences between the 21 and the 25. Like why someone might want to choose one over the other.
Yeah, I think with the 3.5 to 21, most of your shots, even 1,000 plus, you can be taken on 21 power, if you're familiar with your weapon. And so the advantage of the 21 would be maybe 1.7 ounces in savings. You're going to have a slightly shorter optic, I think it's just shy of an inch between the two. So if you're counting ounces, maybe you're using a climber or something like that, the 21 would probably be a good choice for you.
It's a smaller objective too, right?
Yes.
So it's just a little more compact. Aesthetically, it's going to look a lot better on a climber for sure. 1.7 ounces. I mean, if you're a real ounce pincher, that probably means something. But and you're getting a half power, so you're getting a little more field of view, right?
Yep, a little more field of view on that 3.5 to 21 for sure. So if you're going to be in real tight quarters, I mean, you can do it with either scope, but on that base power, you'll have a little more field of view. So if you believe you're going to, find yourself in like a jump shooting situation, that could be an advantage for you, for sure.
I run the 25 on all my hunting rigs. I'm not an ounce pincher, and I actually like a heavier gun anyways. But I have the 21 on my thermal night rig gun, which brings up the thermal for Radikl. And the reason why I have the 3.5 to 21 is when you're running a thermal clip-on or a night vision clip-on on the front, you need a lower power. You're going to run that scope at the lowest power, so 3.5 on this scope to probably max 8 power, depending on what optic you're using. If you run it past 8 power, you're getting some pixelation and some blurriness. So I actually hunt probably more thermal hunting than I do normal hunting, which says a lot. But this Radikl scope is probably one of the coolest scopes you can pair with shooting at night with a thermal or night vision. Do you guys have any time behind thermal?
Just a little bit, but nothing on a clip-on like you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, so you have a standalone, but now that it says clip-on, you have a standalone thermal, which is like a pulsar scope you throw in, and it's just this unit. The problem with those is you can't dial or anything, which is totally against my motto. I want to dial to every yardage, right? So the combo that I have is a sweet little Verdict 22-250. I'm not going to give too many specs so I don't go to prison, but 22-250, and I've got a 3.5 to 21 on it, and I'm running a bunch of different clip-ons, just doing testing for a project. And when you look through, say if you're going to pair this clip-on with just a basic scope, a non-smart scope, you're usually hunting at night with thermal. And let's say you range a coyote at 400 yards. How do you accomplish this shot? You guys not knowing anything about thermal, how would you do that?
You just hold over, right?
Yeah, which makes me want to bar.
Yeah.
But you got to dial or you hold over, right? I'm not going to hold over. So if you had a normal scope, you got to dial. You're going to have to get your phone and shine the light at the turret and dial and then come back in the scope and find it, right? So with this HUD on the inside of the Radikl, you don't have to. You just reach up and it's reading your range. Obviously, I'm going to turn the brightness down all the way so it doesn't blind me. But you just dial 450, and actually I take it to the next step. I take my wind meter and I can just judge the wind just based off of, feeling, direction, take a wind speed, plug it in. And like Mike Pilch, I don't know what the F it's doing, but I'm just going to trust it.
Yeah.
And Probably one of the coolest shots that we've pulled off was a coyote at 760 yards in the dark with the 22-250.
Were you filming that one?
No, we don't film any of these adventures. But the Radikl in a thermal or night vision, scenarios.
Well, that sounds like a deadly combination.
It is. It is.
Yeah, having those inside that heads-up display. I mean, head over to Revic if you want to see kind of what this display looks like. But I think it's crazy that this heads-up display just lives inside of your scope above the reticle. It's not distracting. Much like a great analogy you had for the car. It's not distracting having that heads-up thrown on the windshield. It's an additive benefit. But having that in there, you don't have to worry about those low light conditions or no light conditions when you're in thermals. I was hunting with a buddy that had a collar scope. And in those low light early morning conditions, I'm reaching over, dialing for him and confirming because he can't see those tiny little markings on the MOA turret.
Mm-hmm.
And the magic happens in those low light or no light scenarios, right? So, you have that heads up display, you can adjust the brightness, you're able to see those numbers, which is critical. So if you're having trouble seeing those markings on your turret, this is another reason why that internal heads up display makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's pretty neat too. Like another cool scenario with the Radikl is like, because you have a ballistic profile that you're loading to your scope, let's say you change ammo or you got a different lot of ammo that's shooting a different velocity, you can just quickly update your profile and push that over to the scope again, and now you're ready to rock. So we didn't touch on that too much, but if you have changes to your ballistic profile, those can easily be pushed over to the scope, which is pretty cool.
No, it's a great scope. It's a lot of fun to shoot. I think everybody that even looks through, even if you don't shoot through it, if you just look through it, you start to see the value of some of the stories we've been talking about. I don't know, did we miss something that we wanted to cover?
We've been going over all of the good stuff. I think it's probably important to note that this isn't one of those scopes where you can just buy the gun and pull it out the day before. Like, you need to actually go learn the functions and features of this scope, specifically some zeroing functions, and get trained about what zero angle means. Jordan and I had a really good master class this last week about zero angles, and like this, you need to go practice with this scope. For sure.
Yeah.
It's very simple, but it's simple because of the time we put into it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like the zero angle, traditionally a lot of our, a traditional rifle scope really would just take a normal ballistic profile, but with the Radikl, it requires a zero angle, which is basically the relationship between the angle of your scope and your bore. And so the app will calculate it for you. But the cool thing about zero angle is you can change your environmental conditions and, you still have a zero. So the scope does require that, and it's maybe not as intuitive as, what we used to think. But I'll tell you what, the technology and the ability to move conditions and still be zeroed is pretty awesome. And, the app will do that for you.
For the non-technical guys, what Jordan is saying is you can zero your rifle. Let's say, for example, I'm going to take my 7PRC Nexus with the Radikl on it. I'm going to zero it here. And when I calculate this zero angle, I got to make sure that my environmentals and azimuth and angle and every entry I have into that thing is as absolutely perfect as I can get.
And that's the day you're zeroing.
The day I'm zeroing, the moment I'm zeroing. So if I'm shooting in Burlington, I'm going to be shooting it's actually like a 350 azimuth, and it's a flat angle, and whatever the temperature is, and make sure that the wind's plugged in. Like, you got to make sure that stuff is perfect. But once I get that, I can travel to Tajikistan and I don't have to re-zero my scope. Now, assuming that no damage is done to the rifle, it should shoot right on. Now, how I'm going to check that is I'm not going to shoot 100 yards. I'm going to try and pick something that's 75% of the yardage that I think I'm going to shoot. Tajikistan's a bad example because I think we're actually going to be shooting very far. But let's just say we're on a sheep hunt. you're probably not shooting past 600 yards. So if you pick a rock at 400 to 600 yards, you shoot 3 shots, and it's golden, like you're good to go. It's very, very easy. And then you can take that gun from your sheep hunt. You can travel to New Zealand at 1,000 feet above sea level, and completely different atmospherics. The humidity is going to be out the wazoo. And same thing, pick 75% of your max shooting distance and shoot a rock or whatever, a target if you're lucky, if they have steel, and you're good to go.
Yeah, and you can see that difference when you go from, like, when we went to Texas, we sighted in here, it was -20, and then went down. It was a similar elevation, but, you know, where your scope would show, well, for that day, the scope showing, you know, 100 yards at 0, holding it level. Then you go to Texas, it might show like 115 is now what that 0 is. But it's still just, you know, as you dial, you're still just dialing range. But that's, you know, it's accounting for it with that 0 angle profile. Yeah, which is pretty neat.
Yeah. Well, as Derek mentioned, like any technology, you should really understand it before you go out on a hunt. You should do that with your range finding binos and all the equipment that you're running to make sure that.
Yeah, that was a great way of describing 0 angle, and what you need to do is you move locations for your hunt. I don't think I could have said it better. So that's perfect.
I usually, even though that is the use case, I usually show up, and it's kind of a pain in the ass, but I usually recalculate a new 0 angle, re-zero the rifle, but I'm kind of going to a spot where I can shoot 100 yards every time. You go to Tajikistan, they probably don't have a 100-yard target, or anywhere else, right? So you could do it both ways.
Awesome. Better to be sure, right?
Yeah. If you have
got
the
that
time,
much on the line.
if you have the time, for sure.
This was a lot of fun, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in. We'll throw some resources down the show notes. We talked about the Revic video where we're comparing the different types of ballistics. We talked about the reserve programs, the guided hunts on Gunwerks. Derek just teased out the Marco Polo hunt that's coming up.
Tajikistan. It's already full, so I felt like I could tease that one.
Oh, yeah. All right. So you're just bragging. Yeah. We got some more for you to take a look at there. And as we're talking about scopes, I mean, Revic's got a really cool contest right now, that Send It Smarter contest, where you submit your phone scope content, you know, from the rifle scope or from your binos or Radikl Smart Scope, and win some cool gear. So head on over to revicoptics.com, take a look at all the resources over there. But I think that wraps up our content. Thanks, guys.
Thank y'all.
Yeah, appreciate it.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram, or send us an email to podcast@gunwerks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunwerks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.